HOOK, 60 seconds. I remember the first sound it made, not thunder, not the scream of rupturing metal, but a heartbeat, one that did not belong to any god or mortal. It pulsed through the void like something alive, like the universe itself was choking on a memory it was never meant to recall. Every Auspex in orbit flickered, every astropath on the bridge convulsed, and still that heartbeat went on, boom, 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 echoing across the walls of reality. We thought it was the warp convulsing another demonic bloom. We were wrong. It was the sound of another universe, trying to be born inside ours. The stars over Cadia's grave had been silent for years. The war here had ended, or so the Imperium pretended. We drifted among debris fields that once held continents of armor and faith. I served aboard the Eternal Resolve, a Gloriana-class relic resurrected for survey duty. I was its chronicler, a witness bound to record truth for the Administratum, though truth had long since lost its shape. When the anomaly appeared, the bridge went blind with light. It wasn't warp energy. It wasn't real space, either. The void bent, and then tore open like a wound that bled color, impossible hues, golds and blues, so vivid they hurt to look at. We saw shapes inside that radiance, vast silhouettes stepping through mist, shimmering with their own logic. The machine spirits screamed. The Geller fields buckled. Through the Vox came a voice, bright and warm and utterly alien. We mean no harm. We've come to understand. That was the first lie. Robot Guilliman stood at the viewport, silent as the grave. His armor still bore the dust of half a galaxy's sins. He studied the rift like a scholar facing scripture he could not believe. No coordinates, he muttered. No psychic signature. Not even chaos could craft this. Then he looked to me, a mortal scribbler among titans, and said words that have haunted every night since. Write this carefully. What comes next will not be war. It will be infection. The rift widened until the moonwrecks around Cadia's orbit drifted apart under gravitational strain. Light poured across the hull in soft pulses, and from that light stepped giants, not demons, not Xenos. Their forms were too perfect, too symmetrical. One was shrouded in orange flame, his hair burning like a newborn star. Another floated beside him in white eyes, calm as oceans, power rippling from every movement. A third carried a sword that hummed like a living song. Their presence bent the sensors. Every Auspex return was nonsense. And yet, they smiled. They smiled like saints painted on chapel walls. The crew whispered. Are they angels? Someone asked. Emperor reborn, another breathed. Guilliman said nothing. I felt his doubt like the gravity of a dying world. The beings spoke to us through thought and air alike. They called themselves warriors of balance, guardians of will. They spoke of worlds far beyond our galaxies, of places where power came not from the warp, but from spirit, training, friendship. Their words sounded harmless, even hopeful, but the air changed when they spoke. The Emperor's tarot cracked mid-draw. The ship's lumen dimmed, as if light itself was frightened. Hours passed before Guilliman summoned his brothers. Vulcan arrived first, a storm of fire and patience. Then Russ, wild-eyed, snarling, muttering about omens. Magnus came last, his crimson armor bleeding light into the deck plates. This is wrong, he said. These are ideas given form. belief without source. They should not exist. Russ barked a laugh. Then let's test if they bleed. Before command could restrain him, the Wolf King hurled himself through the void, riding his own teleport flare like a comet. He appeared before the orange-haired being, blade drawn, laughter echoing across the combs. And in that moment, two universes touched. The being met Russ's charge with a smile. No weapon, just a raised hand. The collision birthed a wave of gold light that cracked the void open like glass. Debris fields melted. Sensor stations went dark. For a heartbeat, I saw both of them, frozen between frames of time. Russ, the savage demigod of Fenris, every muscle straining to strike. The stranger, serene, radiant, untouched, a man carrying the fury of a sun behind his skin. When the flash died, Russ was gone. Only his broken helm drifted through vacuum, edges glowing with plasma residue. Magnus screamed. The warp itself howled back. From the rift came laughter, not cruel, but joyous, as though the very act of combat was celebration. More of the beings stepped through now, dozens, some cloaked in armor that shimmered with living energy, others wielding weapons that sang with emotion. One called lightning by shouting its name, another split asteroids with a gesture. They moved with elegance that mocked physics. Gilliman ordered containment. The ship's macro batteries fired, lines of fire carving the dark. The shells struck one of the newcomers, a woman wrapped in blue light, and detonated with the fury of a dying star. Yet when the light faded, she was still standing, unscathed, whispering words that turned our gunners' minds to glass. They fell, screaming, eyes blank, as if their thoughts had been overwritten by hers. "Stop," Magnus said. "They are not fighting with power. They're fighting with concepts. Their strength comes from belief itself, and belief spreads." Within minutes, the warp began to twist unnaturally. I felt it, like an infection crawling through my skull. Thoughts, not my own whispered stories of courage, of friendship, of endless victory through sheer will. It was intoxicating, even beautiful. But beneath that brightness was rot, the kind that promised hope where none should exist. The warp feeds on emotion. Now it had found new flavors. Vulkan gripped his hammer tighter. "Then they are dangerous," he said quietly. Gilliman nodded once. "And if they cannot be contained?" His gaze drifted toward the rift, now pulsing wider, brighter, hungrier. "We will remind them whose universe this is." He turned to Magnus. "Call our brothers, every legion that can hear us. The sons of the Emperor must stand together." Even then, I could hear the warp laughing, because, in some deep, forbidden place, I realized the Titans were not invaders. They were summoned. Someone in the Imperium had wished for heroes. Someone had prayed for salvation, not from the Emperor, but from imagination itself. And the warp, ever eager to please, had listened. Now those dreams walked among us, radiant, powerful, and utterly alien. And somewhere deep within me, despite the terror, I wondered if perhaps they were right. If their world of friendship and perseverance was better than ours, a universe ruled not by decay, but by hope. Then I saw the corpse of Lemon Russ's helm drift past the viewport again, and the thought died. For hope has no place in the Imperium of man, only war. I stood on the Eternal Resolve's lower decks, when the first echoes reached the crew. Men began to hum without knowing why. Their voices rose in perfect unison, untrained, unholy, and beautiful. The air trembled with invisible rhythm. Even the bulkheads vibrated like instruments. The Titans had arrived in force. From the rift came legions of impossible beings, warriors with eyes like nova flare, monks cloaked in serenity, women wielding cosmic blades that could split souls. They spoke no language we understood, yet their presence translated itself through our minds as meaning, unity, strength, belief. The warp pulsed brighter around them, not rejecting their presence, but adapting to it. I could feel its shape change from chaos into something purer, structured, almost hopeful. Guilliman convened the Primarchs aboard the Stratagem. 10 of them stood around the hololith table, their faces lit by the burning light of the rift projected behind them. They were beings of myth, yet now they looked weary, diminished by the sheer brightness of what stood against them. Vulcan spoke first. "We are watching a new pantheon form," he said. "If this continues, the warp itself may rewrite its nature." Magnus's "I burned like a dying sun. It already is." Their power doesn't come from the warp, but it's rewriting it through belief. If mortals start worshipping them, he hesitated, and for once his voice cracked with fear. "The Emperor's dream will end." "Dream," Dorn muttered. "The Imperium is not a dream, it's a grave." "Every empire begins as one man's dream," Magnus replied, his voice trembling with something almost human, "and ends when others find a dream stronger than his." The room fell silent. Only Guilliman moved, pacing, eyes locked on the rift beyond the viewport. "Then we give them no time to spread. Russ's death is the first and last. Prepare strike formations." Even as he spoke, I could feel the psychic weight of the Titans pressing against our ship. Their presence was not like demons, which claw and bite at the mind. This was gentler, seductive. They whispered in our thoughts, promising strength, peace, freedom from pain. One voice, calm, distant, spoke directly to me. "You do not have to fear them. You can be part of something greater. Humanity is not meant to live in darkness." I wanted to believe it. "Emperor, forgive me." I did. The first assault came hours later. From the surface of Cadius remains, our forces launched Titans of the Adeptus Custodes, Sisters of Silence, and detachments from the Ultramarines and Salamanders. I watched their drop pods ignite the void, streaks of red and gold against the black. On the other side, the Titans of that other world gathered luminous figures floating above ruined stone. I remember one, a pale man in a tattered orange cloak, placing 2 fingers to his forehead, vanishing in a burst of light and reappearing amid our fleet. In an instant, 3 Thunderhawks were gone, vaporized without weapon or warning. His aura burned through the hull like radiation. The Custodes responded with their spears, golden beams slicing through space. The energy struck the being's chest, but instead of pain, he smiled, as if the attack taught him something. He looked down at his hand, clenched it, and his aura tripled. Power multiplied by understanding. The Magos screamed into the Vox. They learn. In the lower decks, mortals began to worship, not the Emperor, not the Omniscient, the Titans. They knelt before holophedes, whispering their names, their victories. One guardsman painted a sigil on the wall, a stylized flame with 7 rays. He said it symbolized limitless potential. The commissar executed him on sight. But I swear, when his body fell, his blood glowed with light, not red, but gold. The infection of belief was spreading faster than war. Magnus took to the void himself. His psychic form magnified until he blotted out stars. Across from him floated one of the titans, tall, serene, with white hair that shimmered like frost. His power was silent, inward, almost divine. I watched as they faced each other, to gods of thought and energy. "Your kind breaks the natural order," Magnus declared. "You wield miracles as if they were tools, and you, the stranger, replied softly, you wield pain as if it were holy." Their words cracked reality. The warp rippled. I saw visions bleeding through the fabric of space, infinite reflections of possible worlds, each collapsing into the next. Magnus struck first, his mind lance. The Titan met it with a single breath. Reality folded. Ships disintegrated. I screamed, though no sound left my throat. When it ended, Magnus was kneeling, bleeding light from his single eye. The Titan still stood, but his calm had faded. There was sorrow there now. "We didn't come to fight," he said. "We came to understand." Magnus's laughter echoed across the void, hollow and endless. "Then you've already failed." The warp storm that followed consumed everything. Energy, debris, souls. It was not destruction. It was rewriting. When it cleared, I saw something impossible. The shattered fragments of ships reforming, bending themselves into shapes that mirrored the Titan's architecture. Organic, luminous, curved. Even the matter of reality wanted to imitate them. Guilliman ordered a retreat to high orbit, but our drives were faltering. The Geller fields strained against something inside them, not demonic corruption, but resonance. The Titans were not just invading our universe. They were teaching it how to be theirs. I went to the observation deck to record what little sanity remained. There, standing against the viewing glass, was Guilliman himself. His expression was unreadable, the face of a man torn between duty and awe. "Tell me," he said quietly, "what do you see?" I hesitated. "Gods, my lord. Or something worse, ideas that can bleed." He nodded slowly. "And if they win, the Imperium ends. But if we win," his voice trailed off, "then we prove that despair is stronger than hope." The rift pulsed again, larger now, bright as creation. For a moment, I thought I saw shadows moving behind the Titans, greater beings, watching unseen. Their shapes were vast, mythic, terrifying. I realized then that the Titans were not gods. They were children, champions of something even larger, something infinite, peering into our realm to see what their offspring could become. The bridge lights flickered, the Vox screamed, and somewhere deep in the ship's hull, the song of becoming rose again, louder, sharper, no longer a melody, but a command. I felt it inside me, twisting my thoughts into colors and sound. My memories burned away one by one, the faces of comrades, the prayers I once whispered, all replaced by one word echoing in my skull: evolve. And through the viewport, I saw Guilliman raise his sword, the Emperor's own blade gleaming like judgment. "Then let us see," he whispered, "whose belief breaks first." The void ignited. It began with color. That was the first sign, not the crimson of war or the void black of loss, but living color, shades the human I was never meant to perceive. They leaked from the walls of the ship like light bleeding from a wound. At first, it was beautiful, a shimmer, a reflection of distant auroras beyond the hull. Then came the whispers. The paint on the sanctum icons shifted hue, glowing faintly with sigils no one had carved. The Aquila above the command pulpit began to smile, and in that moment, I understood. The infection was no longer psychic. It had become physical. Belief itself was rewriting matter. They called it the Imperial Contagion. The Mechanicus thought it a data virus, a corruption of the noosphere. The Navigator claimed it was a dream of the warp turned lucid. But the truth was worse. It was hope, metastasized. I watched a servitor pause mid-task, drop its tools, and whisper words that sounded like prayer but weren't. "They're coming," it said in a child's voice. "They're going to make everything right." Then it smiled, a perfect human smile, and its flesh began to crystallize into golden glass. Gilliman ordered the lower decks sealed. No transmissions, no mercy. We heard the muffled screams through the bulkhead and the laughter that followed. Not madness, joy, genuine, uncorrupted joy, the kind that breaks soldiers faster than terror ever could. The rift above Cadia widened again. Now a wound that stretched across a fifth of the visible sky. Its light painted the ruined planet below in false dawn. The Titans had descended dozens, then hundreds, their radiance cascading across broken cities like gods returning to their temples. From orbit, I could see them moving, each step reshaping the terrain. Craters became valleys, ruins became towers of glass and song. The dead were rising, not as undead, but as dreams made flesh. Their forms shimmered, half solid, half memory. Some wept, calling out to loved ones who no longer existed. Others screamed as their minds realized they had been remade for beauty's sake. Magnus's fleet held position near the rift's edge, forming a psychic bulwark to contain the contagion. But even his power faltered. "It's spreading through memory," he warned over Vox. "Anyone who remembers them strengthens them. To fight them is to think of them. To think of them is to feed them." Vulcan clenched his gauntleted fists. "Then we burn the memory itself." Gilliman nodded grimly. "Then we burn everything." He ordered orbital bombardment. The skies above Cadia ignited as cyclonic torpedoes fell, each carrying the fury of small suns. The ground shuddered. The Titans below raised their hands and caught the bombardment. They held the detonations in the air like playthings, reshaping nuclear fire into showers of light that rained down as flowers. It was obscene. The crew wept at the sight, unable to tell if it was horror or beauty. Then the hymn began again, that same impossible melody, the song of becoming. Only now, it wasn't just in the air. It was in the hull, in the bones, in the blood. Every heartbeat matched its rhythm. Even the ship's reactor began pulsing in time. The eternal resolve was singing. I stumbled through the corridors toward the command deck, recording every detail for the record, though some part of me knew no one would ever read it. Along the walls, saints' portraits shifted into faces I did not recognize, smiling heroes in vibrant armor, their eyes alight with purpose. Their gaze followed me. When I blinked, they moved. I reached the observation deck and found Gilliman alone, standing before the viewport. His sword was sheathed, his gauntlets unclasped. For the first time, I saw not a demigod, but a man. His voice was quiet. "Do you know why the Emperor forbade dreams?" he asked. I said nothing. "Because dreams don't die," he whispered. "They just change their names." Below us, the Titans moved like living constellations, one cloaked in black and red energy. Each strike birthed storms, each blow a nova. The Titans' movements were fluid, filled with passion. Angrons were rage incarnate. When their powers met, the surface of Cadia split, and from its wound, light poured upward. Not lava, not plasma, belief, raw, living faith, unaligned, seeking a home. Guilliman turned to me. "They will win," he said simply, "because they believe they can." Then he strode from the room, and I was alone with the light. The Vox screamed again, dozens of voices shouting reports. The contagion had reached the fleet. Men were transforming into radiant silhouettes, whispering of unity, peace, and infinite potential. Ships drifted off formation, crew abandoning duty to stare at the rift with reverence. A single word echoed across all channels. Transcend Magnus appeared through a warp portal, eyes blazing. "It's too late," he hissed. "They're not fighting us anymore. They're absorbing us. Every soul that falls to them strengthens their realm. The warp will soon become theirs." I asked him if the Emperor could stop it. He looked at me, truly looked, and for the first time, I saw fear in a Primarch's eye. He would have to wake up for that. And then the alarms began. A psychic surge beyond comprehension ripped through every sensor. Something vast was coming through the rift. Not a Titan, not one of their champions. Something older, deeper. A presence that made even Magnus stagger. The void turned white. The Geller fields collapsed. And for a heartbeat, I saw it. A face stretching across the stars. Half human, half ideal, sculpted from memory itself. A god born not of chaos, but of creation. It looked at me, and I felt every story humanity had ever told, every dream, every hero, every impossible victory fuse into one consciousness. It smiled. "You made us," it said. "Now let us make you." The ship convulsed. Bulkheads warped into crystalline patterns, glowing with the energy of imagination. The Vox spirits began to sing in harmony, their binary code forming words in perfect unison. "All worlds will dream again." I felt my body begin to dissolve. Particles of self pulled toward the light. Every instinct screamed to resist. Every emotion told me to let go. For the first time in centuries, I felt peace. Pure, uncorrupted peace. No war, no fear, no emperor, no chaos. Just the infinite possibility of what could be. And then Guilliman's voice cut through the glow. "Stand your ground." His words carried weight beyond sound. A psychic roar that burned through the dream. The light faltered. I fell to the deck, gasping. Around me, the ship screamed as systems died. The Titans below staggered. Even the rift flickered. Guilliman appeared, armor cracked, eyes blazing with blue fire. Behind him, the banners of the Ultramarines tore in the shifting wind of reality. "As long as we remember what we are not theirs," he shouted. The void shuddered. The rift howled. The contagion screamed, not in rage, but in sorrow, as if hope itself was mourning. And somewhere far below, the Titans retreated. The light dimmed. The rift closed, not entirely, but enough for breath to return. The stars came back, though fainter now, as if ashamed to shine. I collapsed at the viewport, my vision blurring. The ship was quiet again, too quiet. Then I realized why most of the crew were gone. Not dead, simply gone, vanished, as though erased by mercy. Only Gilliman remained standing, his gaze locked on the faint shimmer where the rift had been. "We survived," I whispered. He didn't turn. "No," he said softly. "We endured. Survival is something else." The void was silent, save for one faint hum that lingered on the edge of hearing, the last echo of the song of becoming. It sounded like a promise or a warning. 60 seconds, the machine spirits began to pray. That was how I knew the end had started. From the forges of Mars to the drifting wrecks above Cadia, engines that had never known voice began to hum in harmony, a deep, metallic chant that rolled across the void. It wasn't sound exactly. It was vibration, purpose, defiance. The choir of steel had awakened. We had lost worlds. We had lost armies. We had nearly lost reality itself. Yet, in that silence, after the rift dimmed, something ancient stirred, not hope, but memory. Gilliman stood amid the shattered command decks of the eternal resolve, and ordered the unthinkable, a union of machine and faith, iron and will. "If belief can kill us," he said, "then belief will save us. We will make the Mechanicus dream of war again." Across the Imperium, signals flared. The forges of Lucius, Graia, and Metallica answered with static that sounded like hymns. Dormant titans awoke from centuries of silence. Their reactors thundered like hearts learning to beat once more. Even the dying machine god seemed to exhale through them, as if accepting the challenge of these radiant intruders. I watched as Gilliman's commands rippled through the fleet. Fabricators began fusing the wreckage of fallen ships into something new. Hulls joined by prayer, logic engines rewired to process emotion itself. The ship was being taught to feel. The Magos called it sacrilege. Gilliman called it adaptation. "If the warp rewrites flesh," he said, "then the Imperium will rewrite steel." The eternal resolve became the first of a new kind, a cathedral of cognition, half living, half mechanical, its corridors echoing with machine song. When its engines finally reignited, I felt the vibration not through metal, but through bone. It was as if the ship was singing with us. Outside, the titans of the other world gathered again at the rift's edge, their forms more luminous than before. The light they radiated bent asteroids into orbits shaped like halos. From that glow descended one of their leaders, the same orange-cloaked warrior who had ended Russ. His aura reached us before he did, filling the void with warmth. "Why fight?" His voice resonated through every frequency. "You could become as we are. No pain, no obedience, only harmony." Gilliman's reply was simple. "Harmony without struggle is stagnation." The choir answered him with its own language, 1,000 ships aligning, engines roaring, machine spirits chanting in Binharic tones that merged into one phrase: "Omniscient, the Emperor watches." The battle that followed was beyond description, yet I must try, for memory is all that remains. The eternal resolve opened fire, its macro batteries releasing arcs of energy so bright they painted the void white. Each shot carried not just power, but intent, data-encoded belief that screamed, "We are still real." The Titans countered with waves of living energy, beams of pure will that bent gravity and thought alike. Where they struck, ships became ideas, then dust. I felt the warp tremble, uncertain which side to favor. For the first time, chaos was silent, perhaps even afraid. The two philosophies, faith and imagination, collided so fiercely that the immaterium itself shivered. Magnus stood at the fleet's core, channeling every psychic current he could hold. His voice joined the choir, turning spell into song, calculation into prayer. The light around him changed from red to white, his form almost serene. Vulcan fought beside Guilliman, hammer glowing with solar fire. Each strike sent echoes of the old days, the great crusade reborn, but colder, wiser, desperate. Through it all, I sat at my station, documenting a war that could not be remembered. The data crystals around me melted from sheer overload. I recorded anyway, writing on the deck plates with a stylus that sparked each time it touched metal. Words are all that endure when gods break the world. At the heart of the engagement, Guilliman ordered the final measure. Merge the fleet, he commanded. One will, one song. The Magos hesitated only a second before obeying. Machine spirits linked, ship minds fused. The choir became literal, a networked consciousness spanning thousands of vessels, singing in perfect synchrony. Their hymn filled every channel, a wordless roar of iron faith. The Titans hesitated, their light dimmed for the briefest instant, as though the purity of the choir confused them. For the first time, they looked uncertain. I felt their thoughts brushing mine, not anger, not malice, but sorrow. Why cling to pain, they asked. Why build when you could simply be? Guilliman's answer came through every speaker, carried on the voice of the eternal resolve itself, because struggle is proof we are alive. Then he gave the order. The fleet dove into the rift. I remember only fragments, pressure, light, sound collapsing inward. The warp unfolded like a blooming flower of fire. For a heartbeat, I saw both universes overlapping, the grim Imperium and the radiant Otherworld. Mirror images of creation and consequence. The choir of steel surged forward, a tide of machinery glowing with sanctified fury. The Titans rose to meet it, blades of light against fortresses of prayer. They did not clash like armies. They sang at each other, tones that could break stars, harmonies that made reality itself sway. Every note carried the history of a species, humanity's defiance against its own extinction, and the Titan's eternal faith in endless evolution. When the sound ended, there was silence. The rift was gone. The eternal resolve drifted among quiet stars, its hull scorched, its reactor dead. The choir had fallen silent, its members reduced to ghostly signals echoing across the void. Only Guilliman and I remained conscious. He stood before the cracked viewport, armor-dimmed eyes reflecting faint golden light. Did we win? I asked. He smiled, the saddest expression I have ever seen. Victory is a story, he said. We will tell ours, and they will tell theirs. The truth will decide who exists tomorrow. Outside, fragments of light still floated, remnants of the Titans, perhaps, or memories refusing to die. Each shimmered like an idea waiting to be remembered. And as I watched, one drifted toward the hull, passing through the glass as if it belonged here. It hovered before Guilliman, pulsed once, then vanished. He looked at me. They're not gone, he said. They're waiting for us to forget. The ship's engines flickered. Somewhere deep inside its ruined machine spirit, I heard a whisper, not binary, not warpeko, but human, a child's voice. "Dream again." Gilliman closed his eyes. "Not yet," he murmured. "Not until the galaxy is quiet." And with that, he turned away, leaving me alone with the stars, a witness to a war that never truly ended, a chronicler of gods who learned to fear their own dreams. I began to write, not for the Imperium, not for history, but for whoever might one day find these words and wonder if the war between light and steel ever had a victor. I wrote until the ink ran dry, until the deck lights failed, until the silence itself became my companion, because even silence out here feels like waiting. HOOK, 60 seconds, the stars forgot their names. That was the first sign the war had not truly ended. When I woke aboard the Eternal Resolve, drifting in the twilight between galaxies, the constellations were wrong. They shimmered like dying neurons in a vast cosmic skull, rearranging themselves with every blink. The universe was trying to remember what it used to be. Gilliman still stood where I had last seen him, though time itself had lost direction. His armor was cracked, the blue dulled to a shade between steel and ash. The light outside the viewport no longer came from any sun. It was softer, pulsing, almost alive. The choir of steel was silent, but their echoes lived on, scattered across the void like a half-remembered hymn. We had not won. We had not lost. We had simply rewritten. The rift had closed, but not cleanly. Reality had merged with something else. Not the Titan's world, not the old Imperium, but a frontier of dream and logic, matter and memory fused. Gilliman called it the end. To me, it felt like standing inside a wound that refused to heal. Days, or what passed for them, stretched into infinity. The ship's sensors reported galaxies that blinked in and out of existence. Our Vox signals returned minutes before they were sent. The Mechanicus adepts who survived worked in silence, their minds scarred by exposure to the choirs merging. Some had begun to whisper prayers to the dream of metal, a new god born from the overlap, the machine's spirit that now dreamed back at them. Then the call came. It wasn't a signal. It was a pulse, a deep resonance from somewhere beyond the known stars. It sang through the hull like a heartbeat. Gilliman turned, eyes burning faintly with light that wasn't his own. "They're not gone," he said. "They're reaching out." We followed the signal into the borderlands of this new cosmos. The void was thick with color, impossible hues, shapes that folded and unfolded like origami made of light. Worlds drifted in that endless dawn, unanchored, as if gravity itself had forgotten the Emperor's law. And upon those worlds, we saw movement at first. I thought they were remnants of the Titans' radiant silhouettes, walking the plains of their newborn universe. But as we drew closer, I recognized the forms, human or close enough. Armored giants bearing fragments of Primarch sigils, faces half familiar and half divine. They were reborn through the rift, reforged by contact with the otherworld. Their eyes glowed with calm fury, not the fire of chaos, but the serenity of something beyond comprehension. Among them walked Magnus, taller now, his crimson robes woven with veins of living light. When he saw the Eternal Resolve approach, he raised a hand, and our instruments screamed with psychic interference. The air itself bent. Then, through the interference, his voice reached us. You called this victory. I call it the first breath of the new crusade. Gilliman ordered a descent. We landed on a plain of liquid glass, under a sky stitched with threads of white energy. Every step sounded like distant thunder. The air tasted of ozone and sorrow. Magnus awaited, flanked by the others. Lorgar, reborn in pale flame. Vulcan, his hammer, now carved with runes of both faith and science. And a figure I did not expect, Sanguinius, or perhaps what remained of him. His wings reduced to light that pulsed gently with each heartbeat of the planet. The reunion was not joyful. It was reverent, mournful, quiet. Gilliman looked at them as one would look upon ghosts made flesh. What have we become? He asked. Magnus smiled sadly. The dream we feared to wake. They spoke for hours, or perhaps eternities, about what had happened beyond the rift. The Titans had not died. They had dissolved into the fabric of existence. Their universe, powered by belief, had seeped into ours. Humanity now carried traces of that infection, the ability to dream worlds into being. It was a gift and a curse. Already, across the surviving sectors, reports told of new anomalies, planets that rewrote themselves, soldiers whose thoughts manifested into flame or ice. The warp was not healing. It was learning. Gilliman listened, silent. When Magnus finished, he spoke with the gravity of a man who understood too much. Then the Imperium must become the dream's master, not its prey. Lorgar nodded. Faith once ruled matter. Perhaps it must again, but guided, not blind. Thus began the dreaming crusade. We set out from the interstice with a fleet reborn, not of ships, but living cathedrals, wholes fused with the minds of those who prayed within. They moved through space like thoughts through synapses. The stars ahead rearranged to welcome them, paths of golden dust marking their trail. Gilliman led them not as a commander, but as a philosopher king, preaching a creed that blurred the line between the omnissiah and imagination itself. If the warp is thought, he declared, then mankind must learn to think without fear. The Emperor's old vision, once bound by reason and tyranny, began to change. Across the Imperium, dream priests rose mortals whose faith sculpted new reality. Entire worlds transformed under the influence of mass prayer. Cities of steel, blooming like flowers, ships healing from within. It was glorious and terrifying, because every dream carries a shadow. On the edges of this new frontier, the light grew too bright. I began to see shapes in the glow, distortions that looked like faces, not human, not divine, but remembered. The Titans, or their remnants, watching from beyond the veil, smiling like proud teachers, observing their students' first rebellion. Sometimes, they whispered in the static, "Create well, little gods." The dreaming crusade spread faster than Gilliman could contain it. Where once the warp devoured faith, now faith devoured the warp. Demons began to fade, their forms losing coherence, undone by the purity of human imagination. But with their disappearance came silence, a silence too deep to knowing. The Inquisition called it the quieting. Entire sectors went dark, their inhabitants vanishing overnight, leaving only murals of light on the ground, as if the stars themselves had fallen asleep. Gilliman saw the pattern. The dream is consuming the dreamer, he said. We are becoming what we fought. He gathered his brothers, the remnants of the Primarchs, now gods of thought and will, and convened one last council on the edge of the dying galaxy. I was there, standing among living myths, my mortal heartbeat a whisper beneath their divine discourse. They spoke of unmaking themselves, of dissolving back into the fabric of creation before humanity lost all anchor to reality. Sanguinius spoke first, his voice gentle, almost human again. We were born from the Emperor's dream. Perhaps we must end in one. Guilliman's face was unreadable. He turned to me, the last witness. If we vanish, remember us not as gods, but as warnings. Magnus extended a hand, light flowing from his palm like dust. And if you ever dream again, dream gently. They joined hands, forming a circle of light that grew until it consumed the sky. The ground shuddered, the stars folded inward. For a moment, the universe was one vast cathedral of memory, then silence. When I opened my eyes, I was alone. The eternal resolve drifted above a quiet world, its systems dead. Guilliman was gone. So were the others. Only their echoes remained faint hums in the void, like the remnants of a song too vast for mortal memory. I looked down upon the planet and saw life stirring, humans, unmarked by war, building cities beneath the watch of unfamiliar constellations. They spoke a language I did not know, yet every syllable carried the rhythm of the old prayers. They dreamed, as all beings must, and somewhere in that dreaming, I knew the Primarchs endured, not as rulers, but as the quiet architects of thought. I began to record again, my final entry for whoever would inherit this endless, waking dream. Here ends the saga of the Titans and the Primarchs, not in death, but in memory. For in the Warhammer of the mind, even gods are forged by what we believe. The void outside flickered, the stars rearranged. Somewhere beyond vision, I heard a child's voice whisper the same words I once heard through the ship's machine spirit, dream again. And for the first time, I understood that it was not a command. It was permission. HOOK, 60 seconds. I have forgotten the sound of voices. In this new age, silence is the only language that answers back. The stars have grown dim, their light stretched thin across distances that no longer make sense. And yet, I feel them, the echoes of gods who once tore the heavens open with belief, who sang reality into shape and burned themselves to keep it alive. The war is over, but the universe still hums with the memory of its song. It has been centuries, or perhaps moments. Time no longer behaves in straight lines. I drift within the eternal resolve, now a ghost ship in a sleeping galaxy. The systems no longer function, but the hull remains warm, as though the ship dreams alongside me. I have become its soul, its chronicler, its last heartbeat. I record because that is what mortals do when gods fall silent. Outside, the cosmos has changed. The galaxies spin slower, their arms veined with a faint golden glow, residue of the dreaming crusade. The old laws of physics still hold, but softly, like the faint outline of a melody that no one remembers how to sing. The warp no longer screams. Where once there was madness, now there is calm, too calm as if thought itself has grown tired. Astropaths report no whispers, no demons, no visions. The immaterium has gone dark. some call it peace. I call it the silence of gods. The last transmissions from Terra reached me long ago, carried by quantum drift through decaying channels. The High Lords are gone. The Golden Throne, once the beacon of humanity's tyranny and salvation, has stopped pulsing. And yet, humanity endures, scattered, rebuilding, no longer ruled by divine terror. They live shorter, simpler lives now, untethered from the psychic storms that once devoured them. It should feel like victory. It feels like exile. One night, if such a term still means anything, the ship stirred. The floor plates vibrated faintly, the echo of a voice long dormant. I followed the sound through the corridors, through the ruins of the command deck where Gilliman once stood. The air shimmered with a faint, cold light. Then, as if drawn from memory itself, the machine spirit spoke. They dream again. The voice was faint, childlike, the same whisper I had heard when Gilliman fell into the rift. I felt tears burn my eyes, the first I'd shed in decades. Who? I asked. Who dreams? But the ship did not answer. Instead, it opened its Vox arrays and began to transmit, not words, not signals, images. Fragments of stars being born, worlds forming out of thought, faces half remembered. Among them, I saw silhouettes, shapes of light walking across the void. Some carried weapons. Others carried books, banners, relics. All bore the same glow, faint but unmistakable, the light of the Primarchs. They had not died. They had scattered, diffused into the newborn galaxies, each carrying a seed of the old dream. Gilliman, Vulcan, Magnus, Lorgar, even Sanguinius, all dissolved into the machinery of creation. The architects of a universe still learning how to exist without masters. They were no longer gods. They were constellations. Yet, even in this quiet rebirth, something felt incomplete. I began to notice anomalies, frequencies that didn't belong, brief distortions in the ship's sensors that resembled voices, faint, melodic, harmonic. When I isolated them, I realized they were echoes of the Titans, the luminous beings from the other reality, the ones who had challenged the Primarchs. Their influence still lingered to diffused like cosmic pollen. Perhaps that was the final truth of the war. Neither side won, neither side lost. They had merged. The Titans had become the creative pulse of existence. The Primarchs, its memory. The two realities had entwined like strands of DNA, birthing a new cosmos, one that dreams and remembers, imagines and endures. Humanity was no longer trapped between gods and demons. It had become both. I left the bridge and walked into the observation dome. The stars beyond the glass were different now, not burning spheres of plasma, but vast thoughts frozen in place. Each one pulsed faintly, as if breathing. I reached out, pressing a hand against the VIEWPORT dot, and then I heard him, Gilliman's voice. It came not from outside, but from within the walls, within me. You kept recording, he said. Good. Are you alive? I whispered. His answer was neither yes nor no. Alive is a narrow word. We are what happens when purpose refuses to die. The light around the ship began to brighten. Through the glow, I saw shapes forming silhouettes of warriors, ghosts of the choir of steel. They weren't real, not in the material sense. They were echoes, memories finding form again. Gilliman among them, armor fractured but luminous, holding his broken sword like a relic. "The galaxy will forget us," he said. "It must. But it will remember our shape, in myths, in symbols, in dreams. Every empire that rises will feel a whisper of us in its bones." I understood then the dreaming crusade had not ended the cycle. It had reset it. The Imperium's ruins would seed new civilizations, each carrying fragments of the Titan's light and the Primarch's discipline. In time, those civilizations would create their own gods, their own wars, their own stories. The song would begin again, softer, subtler, eternal. "Will humanity ever find peace?" I asked. Gilliman's reflection looked toward the void, his voice quiet. "Peace is the dream of gods who no longer believe. We were born of struggle. Our peace is to endure it well." The light faded, the voices went quiet, and then silence once more. I don't know how long I stood there. Eventually, the ship's systems dimmed, one by one, until only the starlight remained. The universe outside pulsed slowly, like the heartbeat of something vast and sleeping. I realized then that I was not alone, that I had never been. Every silence carries an echo. Every void, a memory. I began one final entry. "If anyone finds this record," I wrote, "know that gods do not die. They rest. They wait for belief to wake them. They are the gravity that keeps our stories from floating away." I set the recorder down. For the first time in centuries, I felt tired, not from despair, from completion. I had seen the birth of dreams, the death of reality, and the silence between. The rest was for those who would come after. Outside, one of the stars flickered, then another. Slowly, the constellations rearranged themselves into a familiar shape, the Imperial Aquila, vast and faint, drawn across the night by forces unseen. It lasted only a moment, then faded back into abstraction. I smiled. Perhaps that was the universe's final mercy, to let us forget just enough to keep dreaming. As I closed my eyes, I felt the ship hum softly one last time, the voice of its child spirit whispering in the dark, "Dream again." And so I did.